Hello, this is Simon from Film Stories, and I want to have a natter this time about, well, I'm kind of calling it Streamers versus Cinema: Dawn of Justice for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a terrible gag, and gotta love a terrible gag. But also, we're seeing a few stories crop up just at the start of autumn 2024 about that clash really between the streaming services and cinema, and the kind of never the twain will meet kind of thing that seems to be coming back. So to put this into some degree of context, couple of stories around at the moment. There's Apple TV Plus. Now, Apple has paid 200 million or so a piece for films such as Argyle and Napoleon and Killers of the Flower Moon, and also it supported a cinema release for those, and all credit to it. However, at the very last minute, it's pulled a wide cinema release for its John Watts directed George Clooney Brad Pitt movie Wolves, that even at the point it was commissioning Wolves 2, which is apparently happening, surely it should be called Wolves, but pedant corner. It's now decided that it's just going straight to its streaming service. It's not going to put the money into a cinema release. It's cheaper to do it that way. But my point here is, where does the footprint of the film go? Because, again, at the point this is being recorded now, Apple TV Plus is the only streamer to win a Best Picture Oscar. That various other streamers have really gone for it. Netflix has really gone for it. But it's Apple, through a film it acquired at the Sundance Film Festival called Coda, directed by Sean Heder. I really like Coda a lot, but it was Apple that was the one that took home Oscar Gold. The thing is, who talks about Coda now? Where is Coda? How do you see Coda? What is Coda? And because Apple purchased Coda, and it was during the back end of the first run of COVID and lockdowns and stuff like that, it just didn't get a cinema release at all. None whatsoever that I could see in the UK or the US, outside of one or two festivals if you want. You can count those. But Apple TV Plus instead is the exclusive home of Coda. Now, Apple TV Plus is a significant streaming service, but it's not got the critical mass of Netflix or Prime Video or even Disney Plus. And so what it's counting on is this film, which was picked up for a sum that proved profitable for the filmmakers, and Apple put its money where its mouth was and backed it with an Oscar campaign. But this film is only available to Apple TV Plus subscribers. It's had a physical media release in one or two countries in the world, but again, nothing widespread. So we're counting on the fact that, first of all, an Apple TV subscriber has access to it, and then that they dig through the Apple menu, and presumably it's quite a way down in the Apple menu now, to watch it. As such, barely anyone talks about Coda anymore, and I think the same fate is going to befall things like Wolves. Also, the Doug Liman released film, The Instigators, I think that's just been announced, that's getting a sequel as well. But Apple has decided it's gunning for its streaming service now. Yeah, the cinema is just no longer a priority. And in that sense, it is utterly following the Netflix model. Netflix had a minor box office hit with the second Knives Out film, Glass Onion. And Ted Sarandos, is it? The head of Netflix was just quoted as saying, well, we're not doing any more. It's done. It's to raise. They basically used the cinema release as a promotion for the Netflix debut of the film. Now, there's an argument that was always so, that you did a big cinema release and actually where you made the profit was on video. But here, it's the model's completely changed. It's just like Netflix wants subscribers. That's where the money is. Cinema is incidental. Doesn't need to bother with cinema whatsoever, and is decreasingly inclined to do so. And so this has come back into focus for a couple of reasons just over the last week or two as I'm talking to you now. So a couple of stories I just want to take a look at. First of all, there's the story of The Brutalist. Now, The Brutalist is, it's directed by Brady Corbett. I've not seen it. It's a 3.5-hour drama which has been strongly tipped for awards attention this coming awards season. That it's likely to be an Oscar frontrunner, that Guy Pearce is in the midst of it, Adrian Brody's in the midst of it. Quite a lot of gongs are likely to be forthcoming. The rights to The Brutalist, after its successful festival debut, have been sold to A24. Now, what this means is A24 will give this a cinema release that they didn't decide to sell to a streamer. And in fact, the main bidders for The Brutalist were said to be Sony Pictures Classics and Searchlight. Searchlight would have put it towards Disney+. Sony Pictures Classics doesn't have a streaming outlet, at least not one that it owns itself. And so The Brutalist is getting a chance at a cinema run and at an awards run. And so that really is, it almost feels weirdly traditional and old fashioned to say that now. And what's thrown that into sharp contrast is an interview that was done with the founder of distributor Neon and its current CEO, Tom Quinn. And that was regarding a film called Hitman, directed by Richard Linklater. Now, I think Hitman is a terrific film. It's another great Glenn Powell performance. Linklater's my favourite of his films in some time, and I really like his movies anyway. And Hitman debuted at the Toronto Film Festival about a year ago now, and Netflix bought the film for $20 million. Now, what Netflix then did with the film was not put it in a cinema. This was purely a Netflix venture. And so, I mean, Netflix was the highest bidder. But as Quinn said in an interview, just talking about that particular film, and the interview was with the Hollywood Reporter, I'm going to quote, he said, "We fell in love with Hitman at Toronto last year." He said, "We absolutely thought Richard Linklater would be an Oscar contender for screenplay and director. And then you have Glenn Powell, who is an absolute vortex of hyper celebrity, fair enough, in a role I found very classic in nature." And Quinn argued this. He said, "No one makes movies like this anymore. The film was made for somewhere between $5 and $7 million. We offered $10 million for US rights only, just the US, which would have been a record sale at that point." He then said, "We believe the film would have grossed in excess of $25 million domestically, with a chance of doing maybe as much as $40 million. Basically, what he's saying is, curated by a smaller distributor, Hitman could have gone into cinemas, could have made itself a reasonable amount of money, could have had a shot at an Oscar. But by taking the higher offer from Netflix, what the filmmakers were left with was more money, a good audience for the first week or two, and this kind of dribbled out." Now, this may all be proven wrong. It may well be. No, Netflix gives this a big Oscar run. In fact, I'm a BAFTA voter, and I know that they're already pushing Hitman as a BAFTA contender. And do you know what? Deservedly so. It's a really good film. It's a really good film. But what it doesn't have as a result of that streaming release is profile. That even though Netflix has come back from the one film a week that it was releasing, it's already moving on to whatever's next. Now, if this had been a cinema release, think about how it would have worked. 3 months before the film was in cinemas, you'd have got a trailer. Then a month or two, a week or two, maybe a month before, you'd have got a junket. You would have lots of interviews out and about, etc., etc. Then you'd have had the cinema release, some degree of word of mouth from the cinema release. Then you would have had a DVD or home release. You'd have had 3 or 4 bites of the cherry. Now, they, of course, had a press junket and they had a streaming release, but they kind of halved the amount of space that the film had to gain attention from audiences. And so now it's one of thousands of films sat on Netflix waiting for someone to recommend them. Now, if the Netflix algorithm determines that you like films like Hitman, hooray, you're in. That's what you're going to get. But that doesn't tend to be how it works. And so you find it almost heading towards the coda point, that unless your streaming movie is a genuine breakout success, Roadhouse this year, I'd suggest, but a lot of that possibly down to the huge publicity generated by director Doug Liman and Amazon, let's just say, disagreeing on the release approach for that film, that more likely is the acclaimed films are going down the coda route, that they almost get forgotten about. Not entirely, but there's no physical media release of these films, and I really think that's important. I will give Netflix credit that it does let some of its films go out to physical media. I mean, we saw Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio last year, a Criterion disc release, a beautiful release as well. Very much the exception rather than the norm. I spoke to Paul Feig a few months ago for his new film Jackpot, and the film he dubbed before, The School for Good and Evil, is on Netflix. I tried to find it on Netflix just by browsing through. Not a chance. And the reason, it's been a year or two and so much more stuff has come. It's buried in the menu. Most of us look at that menu and it's got 50 things on the front page. If you're not on the front page, you're in trouble. And that's what we're sort of finding here. And so I think in the streaming era, you have to give reasons more than ever for people to seek things out. And so I come to the example of the film Longlegs. And Longlegs has been the outlier of this summer's movies, starring Micah Monroe, Nicolas Cage under a wig, Oscar Perkins directed. The promotional campaign for Longlegs proved just what a shot in the arm cinema can give a film. And by cinema, I don't mean like cinema as an art form. I just mean the cinema as a room, getting people out into a cinema to watch a film. You know, and Longlegs, as beyond just the marketing, which was terrific, has shown that if you can get the right film, push it in the right way, there's $40-50 million at the American box office waiting there for you. And that instantly gets your profile when you move on to the next stage of the film's release. God, I remember like people would go to my local video shop for week after week after week and say, when's Terminator 2 coming out to rent? Not even to buy, to rent. Because they just seen it at the cinema, were electrified by it, wanted it again. Or a friend had told them about it, they'd missed it at the cinema. They were electrified by the idea of watching it, and they were making the effort to seek it out. That is kind of one of the unsaid of what a cinema release can do. And as Longlegs, at the point this is being recorded, is now heading out onto streaming and disc releases. Same with Late Night with the Devil, actually, also getting a disc release. These films are being sought out because they got something from a cinema release. They were given a proper chance. And I'm not naive. We're in an ecosystem where it's really hard for a film to break through at the cinema if it doesn't have Deadpool or Wolverine or Inside Out in it at this particular moment in time, or Wind. Wind tended to do well. But still, that doesn't mean you give up on it. And so we're at the point here where Apple is retreating. Netflix very much back into... I mean, Ted Sarandos gave some quote about people watching... was it Lawrence of Arabia on a mobile phone? And you're just like, no. I mean, if you really must, but no, you're missing out on so much. And we're at this place where you've got Amazon that is still backing cinema releases. It's doing partnership. Again, the point this has been recorded, My Old Ass, it's the name of a film. It's not what I'm sat on. Is heading into cinemas through a partnership with Curzon in the UK. It's got Red One, its big Christmas film, partnership with Warner Brothers to get that onto cinema screens. I wonder how long Amazon will carry on doing that in the current ecosystem. But also, I'm keeping an eye on what happens with The Brutalist here. And I'm keeping an eye on what happens with the Oscar films and the oxygen they get from being on a cinema screen, not just for us as an audience, but just for their sheer endurance and ongoing visibility. A friend of mine programs an independent cinema, and one of his huge frustrations a couple of years ago was Martin McDonagh's The Banshees of Inisherin, that was doing great guns, and then it went onto streaming within like 6-8 weeks. It was just gone, and it was, I think, it only got 8 weeks exclusivity in cinemas because Martin McDonagh had insisted on that. I think this is getting really important for independent films, that it has the option. I'm not talking about blockbuster movies that stumble at the box office. I understand that there are schemes in place that mean films like Trap or Borderlands are coming to streaming or on-demand services faster. But I think if you've got the chance to curate an independent, a smaller film, smaller inverted commas, give it that space. Imagine seeing Hitman on a cinema screen. I enjoyed it on streaming, but the phone was going off, the kids were nagging, there was all sorts of noise. Imagine being able to see that in a cinema. People at the Toronto Film Festival in 2023 were able to do that. I was not, and I'm gutted that I was not. And so while I'm grateful that Netflix is putting money into films and making films and backing films, and you can't not some of the stuff that it's done there, I think it's so missing a trick now. Even appreciate it, I'm a boring old nerd, in just not backing the cinema harder. The Brutalist, what A24 does with that, I look at it with anticipation and with hope and with everything crossed. The same for these awards contenders that I hope make the cinema a big part of what they've got coming up. Also look at Terrifier 3 coming through, this low budget horror franchise that suddenly sparked to close to mass market off the back of the cinema. I just think the cinema release matters. I do think things change. I'm not a Luddite. I watch films on streaming. You can see loads of discs behind me as well. I watch films in many, many different ways. Nothing, though, beats the cinema, I don't think. And I think it goes beyond what an audience gets from it. I think you're really selling a film short if you don't give it the chance to find a cinema audience. Thanks for watching.